Welcome to the America's Jobs Team podcast and a very special welcome to our first ever video edition. Today we are releasing the content from our C2 o'clock call from this past Friday, during which we were joined by Quentin, who is the president and CEO of the New Orleans Business Alliance. Quentin wrote a really powerful article that was published on medium.com about his experiences as a Black man in today's world. And today he joins us to talk more about the role that economic developers play in today's movement for racial equity and socioeconomic prosperity. So listen in, and I hope you learn as much as we did.
And so now I'm going to introduce a friend in this business and kind of pick his brain a little bit. As I mentioned, we're going to be talking today about race, and I've been, learning and listening along with many of the rest of you on these calls. Especially my ears have just really perked up in these last couple of weeks. My heart has been impacted, certainly in the last couple of weeks. And to be honest, one of the things that really resonated was this piece that Quentin wrote. And so I encourage you, if you've not read this and you didn't see it on LinkedIn, to look at it and really give it a read, because it was really powerful. And after I read it, I asked him to be a part of this just to help set the stage for the conversation that we'll have in breakout rooms after this. But just to hear a little bit of his experience and what thoughts are kind of on his mind. So the article that he wrote was kind of titled The Cost of Color, but it went much deeper than that. And I think as we are all trying to navigate this, it's just a great opportunity to hear from Quentin, who's an amazing economic developer, has been the president and CEO of New Orleans Business Alliance for the past 5 years, and certainly has a wealth of history beyond that. But Quentin, thank you so much for being here with us today and for talking about something publicly that is so near and dear to your heart, and certainly not the easiest topic to always talk about. So we appreciate you for being here and being courageous.
No, thanks. Thanks for affording me. Carla is a fast friend, and the entire team at Consultants Connect. I mean, this group and what Ron Kitchens has built, I consider him a mentor. So I'm very grateful. So I'm happy to, I think, Carla, you have some questions to guide me so you won't just have me free riffing. So we'll go ahead and get started.
Yeah, so first I referenced the article, and I think they'll probably put a link to that in the chat box here as well. But can you give us just a little insight into, I know it takes a lot of courage to put those thoughts into writing, and in a little insight for those who haven't read the article yet into what the article is about and how you kind of gathered the courage in these last couple of weeks. And I know you've talked about these issues and wrote about these issues before, but we're coming off of 2 weeks of extreme heartbreak and just another, it feels like just another really heavy weight that I'm sure you and your family have felt as well. And how did you get the courage to write something so vulnerable and powerful when it so deeply impacts you and it's so raw in the moment?
That's a complicated question, and I've pondered it for a while. So let me make a surprise announcement. I'm Black. So surprise. That was supposed to be a joke to sort of lighten a heavy
Probably
topic.
The only one unmuted.
Yeah, but and so I've been Black for I'll be 52 this year. I was born in 1968. So 68 was a momentous year in American history. There was a lot of death, but the assassinations of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy, the election of Richard M. Nixon, the Southern strategy. I was born in the South. I'm a son of the South from Jacksonville, Florida. Proud of that. And so I've been grappling with these issues for a while. In our team, New Orleans is a city that is a colorful place, and I mean colorful in all the dimensions of color. It is multiracial. Even within the African American community, there's a color hierarchy that's a part of the history of New Orleans. Just the entire place. It's one of those few cities that's like a character in the novel. The city itself is a character. So leading economic development there for the last, it'll be 5 years, July 1. And I'm not a New Orleans native, obviously, has forced me to deal with and examine race. So given what was happening with COVID-19, the disproportionate impact upon Black and brown folks, so we were already dealing with that. And then you have the Breonna Taylor tragedy, really Ahmaud Arbery, and then you have the Breonna Taylor. And then obviously the George Floyd I think was the breaking point. And a lot of my staff, most of my staff is younger. They're younger. They are millennials, and they have a different sensibility with the public and private space, the personal and the professional, than my generation, those of us who are in their early 50s. And so my response was to give people space to respond, and however you needed to do it. But increasingly, our team said, we need to hear from you. No Black perceived leader, and I always put leader in quotes because I don't think you anoint yourself that. I think you respond to a moment and you see what happens. But no one has said anything. So I sent an email to just our staff. I sort of said, hey, I feel your pain. I feel your exhaustion. I don't have any answers. I wish I could, but I don't. And that was going to be it for me. I wasn't going to say anything else, because in this moment, nerves are frayed, people dissect every word you say. And so I wasn't going to say anything. And we have a close-knit executive team, and one of my executive team members, and I think all of you have kind of a team, but there's sort of that one person whose voice kind of is clear to you or touches you in a certain way. And she said to me, our chief strategy officer, Victoria Adam Phipps, she said, you've got to say something. You've got to say something publicly, right? Quentin, you're going to say something publicly. And I said, no, I wasn't planning to. And it just weighed on me. So that was Friday. My dad, for whom I'm named, who's deceased, and is the wisest person I ever met, sort of said, sleep on every decision. So I slept on it, and I wrote a version of it. It wasn't even called The Cost of Color. And I sent it around to this small executive team, and they said, it's a little analytical, feels a little too economic developy. By the way, my closest advisor, my wife, said, I don't think you should write anything. I would advise you not to write anything. This is not the time for you to opine on these issues. People aren't going to understand it. They're going to shut things off. You've got too many people are counting on you to keep the ball in the middle of the fairway, to use a golf analogy. But I slept on it that Saturday night, and I listened to our pastor, and I just started writing, and it turned out to be The Cost of Color, which is far more personally revealing than I've ever done anything before. So that was the origin of it. We were not sure whether we wanted how the medium. Typically, I would have released it as an op-ed, but we did not want it to be edited out. So this is my first post on Medium. I had seen Medium, but I didn't really know how to post stuff. I still don't know how to post, but my colleagues got it up there. And I would say overwhelmingly, it's probably 15% favorable to unfavorable.
Yeah.
Which I am grateful. So
yeah, I am so glad that your team encouraged you to say something, because I think the piece is really extremely powerful. And I think people not just in New Orleans, but obviously all across the world needed to hear that and just to hear your thoughts on it. And one of the things that you did talk about, and obviously the title of it was that cost of color, but you talked a little bit about the color of green being a color that you really focused on as a Black man. You were really focused on that color of green. And I'd love for you to just kind of talk about that with this group and how that has evolved over time, especially in these most recent events, you know, how you're feeling about that color of green and that kind of foundational theory that you kind of had as a younger Black man, and how you maybe have changed over the course of time.
Sure. So, you know, I was born, as I mentioned, I was born in 68. My parents were first generation college educated. They both were K-12 educators. And so there was a premium on academic achievement for my brother and for me. And candidly, my parents sacrificed for both of us. And the hope was we would become rich. Because there was just that belief that you were not going to necessarily escape. The only way you could kind of escape the ravages of racism was maybe through wealth. Maybe if you could get yourself to the point where people could see the green before they saw the Black, you could be okay. And so, you know, in my earlier days, I was an investment banking analyst in public finance at then CS First Boston. I went to law and business school. I worked in multiple investment houses. I practiced corporate law at a big law firm in New York. But ultimately, I was a public policy major in undergrad. My focus was urban economic development and urban education. And I came back home. I mean, you know, I'm a Christian. I'm unapologetic about it. And I think God has a purpose for you. And I think until you kind of situate yourself in that purpose, you're going to have some cognitive dissonance. So I did. And so the last 8 years I've been in economic development. And while financially I haven't done as well as I've done in other chapters, professionally, just the fulfillment has been much more gratifying. I've also said, I said it at our annual meeting last year, ironically around this time, that I'm an unapologetic capitalist. And that upset a lot of people. A lot of people sort of said, how can you say you're unapologetically a capitalist, given the exploitation that has fallen Black and brown people because of capitalism? And I said, well, look, as I just said, I've been Black for then almost 51 years. So this is nothing new. I've got a Black wife and 3 Black children. But I firmly believe, for all her warts, America is the greatest country in human history. It has a lot of wars. I know that. I mean, 1619, we're coming around 1927 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, not far from Rosewood, Florida, which is outside of Eatonville. So I know the ravage of this. I remember Ku Klux Klan rallies in Ocean Way and Jacksonville growing up in high school. I knew not to date or talk to a white woman. This is just real. This is not me making it up, and also knew from my father. My father was one of the military officers that protected James Meredith when James Meredith desegregated the University of Mississippi. But amid all that, I also understood that there were certain advantages that I had been accorded because of my parents' sacrifice. And I just firmly believed, as I said in the piece, that a lot of places that had not sufficiently gotten beyond race realized that there was an economic cost to not getting beyond race. And I just had hope that if I could be a part of creating more wealth and opportunity for Black and brown people, all people would benefit from it. But these events said maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was naive. Because, everybody from U.S. Senator Tim Scott to academic Henry Louis Gates to actors to athletes have been profiled, stopped. And any one of them could have been George Floyd. And they had all types of credentials. They had all types of wealth. And as I said in the piece, that even amid the creation of multi-million-dollar empires by Madam C.J. Walker and Abraham Lincoln Lewis in Florida, from where I'm from, to A.G. Gadsden in Alabama, to Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, there was still racism. But I guess I just kind of said, well, different time, people aren't, but I guess I was wrong. I was wrong. I probably ran out of time. I probably maybe wasn't as I said in the piece, I wasn't as maybe provocative or bold as I should have been for my children. Now, that's not to say that I would ever say to people that we shouldn't think about, particularly if you decide to be an economic developer, I think you have a responsibility to think about how to make your city as attractive for human and financial capital investment. And what this tells me is that there's a redemptive moment for America. There's a redemptive moment for American capitalism.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I was just listening to a podcast from Brene Brown, and she had Austin Channing Brown on her podcast this week, and she was talking about anti-racism. And I definitely think there's a role for economic development, as you mentioned, but she also talked about that work of anti-racism is really becoming a better human to other humans. So it goes beyond, just like you're saying, it goes beyond how much money somebody has in their pocket and how they present themselves to the world. The true work is really becoming a better human to other humans, and it shouldn't matter how much money you have or those types of things. And you talked a little bit about that cognitive dissonance, and I think that also is a really important thing to just talk about briefly, because cognitive dissonance is basically when you're trying to wrestle between like attitude and behavior. And I think when I've watched how people have reacted to especially George Floyd as the kind of the tipping point, but certainly as we saw it all lead up, that tipping point, people's reaction, you've really seen people kind of struggle with that cognitive dissonance. And it's really uncomfortable when you're in that place of like, I don't believe that being prejudiced and racist is okay, yet I also am realizing maybe there's some things about me or about things I didn't understand that are now coming to the surface. And as humans, we want to jump when that starts to happen. Like, that's the natural response, is to kind of flee to safety. And this is a topic that we can't just flee to safety. We can't just keep fleeing to safety, even though that's what our bodies want us to do. And I think we all have to come together and know, like, we're gonna, excuse my language, but we're gonna get some shit wrong along the way, because we're all human. And we're gonna say things that are misinterpreted, and we're going to all kind of muddle through this together, but we have to keep muddling through, because we can't allow that uncomfortable place to cause us to just, be like, I'm just going to revert back to like, I'm a good person and I don't believe in that. And it makes me feel like I can go to bed at night. So I really appreciate what you wrote in there, and just your story today, talking about those things and in the role that we all play, and not just as economic developers, but as leaders. But I want to switch to, the role of economic development, because we have a lot of influence in our community. We're often gathering all of the CEOs of large companies, big and small companies. We often have ins with media. There's so much influence that can come from an economic development organization. And I'm curious to know, and I know you started the call by saying in New Orleans, you had to get really comfortable with the conversation of race early because of the diversity of that community. And what do you feel like, from your perspective and your seat, economic developers can do in relationship to this issue? And what are some of the things that maybe your team has been doing just based on the diversity of your community that could be good ideas to share with anybody else? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. Let me sort of bifurcate the question. I would say the following. I have members of my team who, and we have a racially diverse team, but it's majority Black, it's majority female, who are disappointed that I am not much more, I guess, strident in my language with regard to issues of race. I think, yes, and we wrote as an organization, I'll get to that later, a statement, unapologetically, Black Lives Matter. But I think we need to also be sensitive to that this is affecting Latinx, is affecting Asian Americans, not only the Pacific Rim, but also folks from India. It's affecting white folks. When I talk about COVID-19, but also the ravages of isolation from economic opportunity. That's that I would argue this George Floyd, we've seen other things on video. We've seen other tragedies on video. But my wife said it best. What really animated people were isolated. They were in their homes. They were trapped in a way that economically, this nation has never, even doing, obviously I'm old, but I wasn't here during the Great Depression. But even during the Great Depression, there was just a difference. There's a heaviness, and you can make the argument, arguably our collective breaths were taken away. I mean, it's not, God has a wicked sense of humor. So there's a respiratory, airborne. And I think this may be his call to get everybody to kind of refocus on, everybody may think in their own power you can do everything, but only he can give breath of life. And he also can, in a breath, do whatever to get our attentions. And then he focuses also on airway constriction to have this important global conversation about race. But having said all that, I think as economic developers, I think there are three things. One, give yourself space and be honest with people that the conversation is going to be wrong. I think it's very difficult, and I've said this to people, and people get upset when I say this, but there's very little incentive for a lot of white men to engage on the conversation of race. Because you know what, if somebody gets it wrong, somebody's going to say, you're racist. And that is like a scarlet R on somebody. So if the rational decision is, why would I ever touch that? That's the third rail. And I think that's part of the challenge we face as a society. We haven't given people space to really engage and get it wrong. And there's no presumption of goodwill. And I think that has been to our detriment. That's one. Two, and people get upset when I say this, but I think it's true. There's a universal poverty across racial lines that should be unifying people to find a more redemptive, better, advanced form of capitalism that solves that. I've lived in Ohio. I've lived in Pennsylvania. I've lived in Illinois. I grew up in Florida. I'm here in Louisiana. I lived in New York City for almost over a decade. I've seen white poverty. I've seen white folks really struggle. And this is not to poverty and economic disadvantage and economic isolation, which is what economic developers are trying to solve and mitigate and reduce, knows no color. Sure, it's disproportionately. I can point to the fact that the unemployment rate for Black men is in certain parts of the country, over 50%. It's the highest upon any group. Yeah, I know that. But that's not to say there aren't a lot of people of other races dealing with isolation from opportunity, inability to become a lifelong learner, which is a big part of economic development, talent development, workforce development, having to evolve and really embrace that as a part of your industry attraction and business retraction efforts. And I think the final thing is, and I know that, and people have said this, oh, you know, this notion of being patient, we want it now. We want, you know, look, I believe that this time will be different, but I can't tell you it's going to be different tomorrow. I can't tell you it's going to be different next year. But I know that if I keep putting one foot in front of the other, and we're all in our ways, and sometimes we won't get it wrong, sometimes we're going to disagree, sometimes we may have to part company. But if we become less judgmental about our efforts and also understand a very different localized context in which we very much operate, a response is going to be different in Northern California than it is going to be in Southern Louisiana, than it is going to be in Southwestern Michigan. Southwestern Michigan look very different than Southeastern Michigan. I mean, some of the stuff you can talk about in Detroit, you're not going to roll over to Grand Rapids and get a whole lot of focus and love. I mean, I'm just saying, it's just different. It's a different sensibility. And people need to be aware of that and give people space and realize that there's no monopoly on right. There's no monopoly on wrong. We have all sinned and fallen short of the glory of the Lord Jesus Christ. And so just briefly on our team, we have 4 different work groups: traditional industry attraction and retention. When I can dig into that, talent solutions, which incorporates workforce development. Then we're very focused on small business growth, and then also strategic neighborhood developments, because our economic development organization is focused exclusively on New Orleans. So we realize that you got to revitalize certain commercial corridors so that people can see tangibly economic progress, so they can answer the question, I know somebody who is benefiting from this economy. It's not some abstract concept that I only can see on television. I know somebody. I can walk to that store that's growing, that's prospering, that's employing me, employing my children, for example.
That is amazing, and I would love to hear more, and we can have a deeper conversation as we go. I'm sure people will have questions in the chat box about the strategic neighborhood development component of your work. But as people kind of fill up that chat box with some questions, I want to ask you, you know, I know people have probably reached out to you in droves, and it sounds like your own team has, to say, like, what as leaders should we do? Like, what advice do you have for where to get started? It seems like a special moment in history, and people feel like this calling in a way, as you mentioned, whether that's because we've all been cooped up. I mean, there's all kinds of dynamics that probably led to why this incident has been so monumental for people. But right now, people are feeling that stir. And so do you have any advice for leaders that are kind of feeling that stir and may not know what to do, especially those that may not be leading an organization but still want to do something as a human? Do you have any advice for people who kind of feel that restlessness or that stir?
Yeah, it's an important question. Look, I think the first thing people need to do is give themselves space to say, and I say it all the time, I don't know. And I reserve the right to change my mind or reverse myself or whatever it might, whatever it may be. So you got to give yourself space to grow, to evolve, to learn. And then you also have to say to your team, everybody is not going to be that person that is out protesting. That's okay. There's some people who want to protest. There's some people who are going to write the cost of color. There are some people that are going to give speeches. There are going to be some people who are going to negotiate to make sure that there is a better procurement system in your local area, such that small businesses, independent of the race of the owner, can participate. Some people are going to say, hey, look, I really want to focus on the intersectionality of race and gender. And that's okay. Some people are going to say, look, I really want to focus on the intersectionality of race and sexual orientation. And that's okay. But the problem is so large. It's that old adage, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. There's enough elephant for each of us to just take a bite. And sometimes I might bump into Carla biting the same piece of the elephant. And we just got to laugh about it and try to have a level of goodwill. And sometimes I may bite and hurt my teeth biting on bone. Or sometimes I may bite something that doesn't taste good. But you got to keep going. And I think that's what I would tell people, that this is, sadly, this has been a 401-year marathon for America, particularly for the Africans who now call America home. And I think that the last thing I would say, and I think this is critical to say, Black America should not see itself as a monolith, and Black folks can't see white people as monoliths. We've got to deal with our biases, our prejudices, our blindnesses. But there's nothing monolithic about Black folks, and there's certainly nothing monolithic about white folks. We're just people. And that's not even talking about Native Americans or Latinx or the Asian diaspora, which is incredibly broad. And so, but only in America could we have held together. So many other countries would have been ripped apart politically. I mean, yes, there's a tension. I'm not being naive, but America has hung together, rightly or wrongly, from 1619 to 1776, and now to 2020. As I tell people, people say, well, you're just too glass half full, and you really need to deal with the reality. I tell people, look, if I had to be blunt, I'll put my odds on Black people. Very few people, if ever, have been through what Black people, and we're still here, still thriving, still struggling, but no other group. I mean, my dad died in 2007. If you told him that they would have elected a Black man twice, that a Black man named Robert Smith would be a private equity investor married to a white woman living in Austin, Texas, you'd be like, what? Now, we shouldn't have to always resort to Black exceptionalism in order to prove the point, but progress. Like I said, my father was with James Meredith in 1963. I'm now sitting in 2020 on a Zoom call talking to majority white folks. My dad would be like, man, please, can't see that happening. And my father was a retired lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, in addition to being a middle school principal. So, and the last thing I would say, and my pastor said something very powerful that stuck with me, because I wasn't I'll be honest, this is probably maybe more than Carla's going to kick me under the table, but I'm going to just say this anyway.
We'll
deal with it later. But I wasn't always an optimist. I'm a relentless optimist, and you have to be that way in economic development. Many times I was a pessimist, slightly, probably clinically depressed for a lot of my years. But through my faith walk, through growth, I've been under the shepherd by some great men and women of faith. But our current pastor, Dr. Mark Anthony Ellis of the United Christian Faith Ministries in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He said something that's profound, that's changed my perspective. He said, it's okay to be disappointed. It's okay to be deeply disappointed, disturbingly disappointed. He said, think about it. Jesus was so disappointed, he was praying and cried blood. That's how disappointed he was. He said, the challenge is you can't seep into discouragement. You gotta always figure out, oh, Mike Harvey's dad was in Oxford, Mississippi. I don't know who Mike Harvey is, but hey, yes, that was quite some times. But anyway, but we gotta keep that. And that's what we have to hold to our communities. We have to provide, as we reopen, as we restart the economy, there will be disappointments. We're going to get it wrong. We may have to snap back. There are a lot of things, but we can't be discouraged. We can't be discouraged as we seek to develop our residents, our friends and neighbors, and make them much more able to be full economic participants.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And Quentin, thank you so much for all that you've shared with this group. We so appreciate it. Just your honesty and your rawness and your realness and just everything about you. You're such a gift to this crew today and to economic development, certainly in general. And I think that we all need to cling. If the transformation always requires some type of hope. And so we all have to cling to hope and that optimism, as you mentioned, as we fight that elephant and navigate that. We all have to cling to that. And I am really encouraged by what you shared. I think it gives us a great perspective and kind of that kick in the butt of like, we need to move from that feeling of devastation and despair and allow those feelings to be stirred, but to shift to how can we be optimistic and how can we start to engage. And I'm excited for this group to now move into some breakout rooms where we can talk a little bit more in small groups about the restlessness that you might be feeling, what things you're doing, questions that you may have for economic developers. I know we're all wrestling with a lot right now between everything going on with COVID-19, which already seemed like a really heavy burden to bear. And now we've kind of have a lot of social unrest and we're trying to navigate that in our community. So I'm hopeful that we have some good questions to ping to you in these breakout rooms, and we'll get you sent over to those here in just a couple of minutes. You'll get a prompt on your screen to join your breakout room, and we have probably about 12 to 15 minutes in the breakout rooms today, and then we'll come back here for a quick close, and then we'll send you on your way for Friday. So Quentin, thank you so much again for everything. You are a true gem. So glad that you're able to join the call. And if you want to stay in a breakout room, that's awesome. If you have to jump, that's fine too. But thank you. And I'll send you another note later today. But I just want to say thank you on behalf of Consultant Connect for being who you are and being willing to share. And I, once again, am so glad that your team encouraged you to write that piece. And I'm so glad that you slept on it and didn't listen to your wife, which normally I wouldn't. I wouldn't encourage you to not listen to your wife normally, but I think that sleeping on it and feeling that stir for you has certainly meant a lot to us. So thank you so much.
No, I'm very grateful to everyone. Unfortunately, I got to jump. I've been on Zoom calls since 7:30 this morning. I got to jump to another one at 2 Central. But I want to thank you. Some kind words have come through the chat function. Thank you. I got to shout out Rachel Pearson's father is a good friend of mine, the Secretary of Louisiana Economic Development, Don Pearson, a tremendous leader, a mentor. We served at Louisiana Economic Development together. So I just want to shout him out as the leader of economic development in the state of Louisiana. So I'm very, very grateful to him. I don't know whether Rachel's still on. I can't see all your lovely and handsome faces, but I saw Rachel in the chat. So thanks so much. I wish I could jump in, but I got to jump to another call. But thank you so much. And we are going to make this work. You're going to make this work, and we're going to do it together. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Quentin. Have a great day. And everybody else, you're going to see a prompt on your screen to join your breakout room.